Control is the lifeblood of a narcissist's world. Without it, their entire psychological framework begins to unravel. This need for control isn't merely a preference, it's a fundamental requirement to maintain the fragile and carefully constructed identity they present to the world. They manipulate, they gaslight, and they coerce, all in the pursuit of a singular objective: to remain at the center of your psychological and emotional universe. The moment you walk away, you strike at the very heart of that objective. You disrupt the illusion that they are the axis around which your life revolves, and in doing so, you take away the foundation of their power. To understand why walking away is so devastating to a narcissist, you must first understand the mechanics of their control. Narcissists operate through a system of psychological entrapment. They create an environment where you begin to question your own perceptions, where your identity becomes enmeshed with their approval. It often starts subtly, small critiques disguised as helpful advice, minor invasions of your privacy justified by their concern, an ever-growing sense that your independence is selfish or harmful to the relationship. Over time, these small encroachments accumulate, and you find yourself doubting your reality, your worth, and even your right to make decisions for yourself. This is by design. The narcissist's power relies on the erosion of your self-trust. If they can control how you see yourself, they can control how you behave. And once you begin to seek their validation to confirm your own reality, they hold the keys to your emotional freedom. This dependency is what gives them the ability to manipulate, to dictate the terms of your emotional life. It's a kind of psychological colonization, an invasion of the mind, where their needs, their narratives, their emotional landscape become more important than your own. But here is the critical point. All of this depends on your participation. Their control is not sustained through brute force. It is sustained through your willingness to remain engaged in their world. You may not even realize it, but every time you justify yourself to them, every time you bend your needs to avoid conflict, every time you second-guess your intuition because they've planted seeds of doubt, you reinforce the structure of their power. And that's why walking away is so profoundly threatening to a narcissist. It's an act of rebellion that breaks the system they rely on to sustain their psychological dominance. When you walk away, you are doing something they cannot easily counter. You are choosing to withhold what they need most: your attention, your energy, your willingness to be controlled. Narcissists live in a world where image is everything. They require a captive audience to reflect back to them the identity they wish to project. Without someone to mirror their false self, to validate their superiority or absorb their insecurities, that image begins to crack. And the greatest threat to that fragile self-emission is someone who no longer cares. Indifference wounds them in a way that anger or confrontation never could. It's important to recognize that when you walk away, you are not simply leaving the relationship. You are dismantling the narcissist's most powerful illusion, the belief that they are indispensable. Narcissists survive by convincing you that you cannot live without them, that your world will collapse in their absence. But the opposite is true. It is their world that collapses when you remove yourself from their influence. Because without you to control, without you to manipulate, they are left alone with the very thing they fear most: the emptiness inside themselves. And make no mistake, they will not respond to this loss quietly. When you disrupt their control, the narcissist is likely to escalate their behavior. They may attempt to draw you back in with promises of change or gestures of affection. If that fails, they may resort to anger, blame, and even character assassination to regain their grip. And this is not because they care about you. It is because they cannot tolerate the loss of power. They cannot face the truth that you have recognized your worth independent of their approval. But here is where you hold the ultimate advantage. Because once you understand the mechanism of their control, you can choose to step outside of it. You no longer have to justify your decision to leave. You do not owe them explanations or emotional performances. Walking away firmly and without compromise is an act of reclaiming your autonomy. And that is the one thing a narcissist cannot take from you without your permission. The most profound realization is this: the narcissist's control only exists as long as you engage with it. The moment you walk away and refuse to return, you break their illusion of power, because their authority over you was never real. It was an illusion sustained by your participation. And once you see through it, you become untouchable. What destroys a narcissist's power is not confrontation or revenge. It is your decision to disengage entirely. By walking away, you send a message they cannot ignore. You no longer define me. And that, more than anything else, is what they fear most. Narcissists are not self-sufficient in any meaningful sense. Beneath the polished facade of confidence lies an insatiable hunger for something they cannot generate on their own, external validation. This is what psychologists refer to as narcissistic supply. It's the psychological fuel that sustains their fragile self-image, and it comes from the attention, emotional responses, and psychological energy they extract from others. Without this supply, the narcissist's carefully constructed identity begins to fracture. And here lies the fundamental truth. When you walk away, you cut off their access to the very thing that sustains their power. To understand the gravity of this, you need to recognize just how dependent narcissists are on their ability to evoke a reaction. Whether that reaction is positive or negative is largely irrelevant. What matters is that you are still engaged, still emotionally invested. When you're angry, when you're hurt, when you're desperate to prove your worth to them, they are still at the center of your psychological world. This is the subtle mechanism by which they maintain control. If they can occupy your thoughts and influence your emotional state, they retain power over you. And every time you react, whether in defense, in frustration, or in hope, you are in effect feeding them. It's a parasitic dynamic. The narcissist cannot self-soothe or maintain a stable sense of self without external input. In a healthy individual, identity is grounded internally through self-reflection, through values, through a coherent and autonomous sense of being. For the narcissist, this inner structure is missing. They rely on others to reflect back to them the image they want to see. If you admire them, you confirm their superiority. If you fear them, you reinforce their dominance. If you fight with them, you affirm their significance. But when you withdraw, when you refuse to engage, they are left with nothing but themselves. And for a narcissist, that is intolerable. Walking away is so destructive to their power precisely because it denies them access to this supply. You are not simply leaving a relationship, you are depriving them of the psychological nourishment they need to sustain their inflated self-image. And this creates a profound crisis for them. Without a source of validation, the carefully curated mask of confidence begins to slip. The grandiose persona they project to the world is just that, a persona. And without external reinforcement, the underlying insecurity, the self-loathing they work so hard to bury begins to surface. You may have noticed that a narcissist's worst fear is being ignored. They would rather be hated than be forgotten. This is because hatred still acknowledges their importance. Indifference, on the other hand, signals that they no longer matter, and that is a blow to their identity that is difficult for them to recover from. It's why many narcissists, when faced with your decision to leave, will engage in a frantic attempt to pull you back into their orbit. They may shift tactics, offering apologies, making promises, even feigning vulnerability, all designed to provoke a response and restore the flow of narcissistic supply. But it's crucial to recognize these attempts for what they are. Not genuine remorse or transformation, but a desperate bid to maintain control. The narcissist is not concerned with your well-being or the health of the relationship. What they fear is the loss of access to your emotions, to your attention, to the validation you once provided. And once you see this dynamic clearly, their power over you begins to crumble. What makes walking away so powerful is that it reclaims your emotional energy. When you are no longer consumed by the narcissist's manipulations, you have that energy to invest elsewhere, in your healing, in your growth, in relationships that are genuinely reciprocal. And the more you withdraw your focus, the weaker their hold becomes. Narcissists cannot survive in a vacuum. Without someone to control, without someone to reflect back to them the image they need, they are forced to confront the emptiness they've spent a lifetime avoiding. But here's something even more profound. When you stop feeding a narcissist's need for supply, you also reclaim your sense of self. Part of what makes narcissistic abuse so insidious is that it erodes your identity over time. You become conditioned to prioritize their feelings, their needs, their reality, often at the expense of your own. Walking away, it's not just about escaping their influence. It is about rediscovering your autonomy, the ability to define your worth independently, free from their distortions. And it's worth acknowledging that this process is not always easy. There is a psychological withdrawal that comes with severing ties to a narcissist. The very dynamic that keeps you trapped, intermittent validation mixed with devaluation, can create a kind of addictive cycle. You may feel compelled to return, to seek closure, to make them understand your pain, but every time you re-engage, you reopen the door to their influence. The real closure comes from recognizing that you do not need their validation to confirm your worth. You never did. When you walk away and refuse to supply a narcissist with the emotional energy they depend on, you deliver a blow that no amount of manipulation can undo, because at the core of their power is your willingness to participate. Without your energy, their illusion collapses. Without your attention, their control fades. And without your engagement, they are left alone with the one thing they cannot face: their own emptiness. In the end, the most profound act of defiance is not confrontation or revenge, it is indifference. When you walk away and refuse to return, you communicate a truth that shakes the foundation of their power. They no longer define you. And nothing dismantles a narcissist's control more completely than that. When you walk away from a narcissist, you force them to confront something they've spent their entire lives avoiding: their own emptiness. This isn't just a metaphorical emptiness, it's a profound psychological void, one that sits at the core of their identity. Most people have an internal sense of self, a coherent, stable foundation built on values, experiences, and the ability to engage in honest self-reflection. For a narcissist, that foundation is missing. What exists in its place is a fragile, hollow shell that constantly demands reinforcement from the outside world. And when you remove yourself from their grasp, you take away the mirror they depend on to reflect back an image they can tolerate. At the heart of narcissism lies a paradox. The narcissist projects an image of superiority and self-assurance, but beneath that surface is a profound sense of inadequacy. This internal contradiction creates a never-ending need for external validation to maintain their carefully curated identity. They cannot tolerate introspection, because to look inward is to risk exposing the emptiness they work so hard to conceal. This is why they surround themselves with people who can affirm their idealized self-emission, people who will provide a constant flow of admiration, deference, or even conflict. It doesn't matter if the attention is positive or negative, as long as it keeps them from being alone with themselves. When you walk away, you interrupt this psychological survival mechanism without someone to project onto, without someone to manipulate, berate, or extract validation from. The narcissist is left exposed to the truth of their inner reality, and that truth is deeply unsettling. This is why a narcissist will fight so hard to prevent you from leaving. It's not because they love you. It's not because they care about the relationship in any meaningful way. It's because they cannot bear to lose the external structure that keeps their inner chaos at bay. What's fascinating and deeply tragic is that the narcissist's entire personality is a defense against this internal emptiness. Their grandiosity, their manipulation, their insatiable need for control. It's all an elaborate attempt to avoid confronting the void within themselves. And when you walk away, you deprive them of the psychological scaffolding that holds their false self together. They are left with nothing but the reality they've spent their lives denying, that without someone to reflect back a desirable image, they don't know who they are. This is why many narcissists will engage in desperate and often bizarre behaviors when they sense they're losing their grip on you. They might suddenly become attentive or affectionate, offering apologies or promises of change. And if that fails, they might swing to the other extreme, engaging in smear campaigns, attempting to damage your reputation, or trying to provoke an emotional reaction just to reestablish some form of control. These behaviors are not signs of genuine emotional depth. They are panic responses to the looming threat of being left alone with themselves. But here's the critical thing to understand. No amount of external validation can ever fill the void at the heart of a narcissist. This is why their demands are never satisfied, why their relationships are always defined by cycles of idealization and devaluation. You could give everything, your time, your energy, your emotional well-being, and it still wouldn't be enough, because the emptiness they carry is not something that can be filled from the outside. It's a structural flaw in their personality, and no one but the narcissist themselves has the capacity to confront and address it. but most of them never will, because doing so would require a degree of self-awareness and vulnerability that their defenses simply will not allow. This is why walking away is so powerful. It isn't just an act of self-preservation. It's an act that reveals the fundamental truth about the narcissist's condition. They are not the powerful, invincible figures they pretend to be. Their entire persona is dependent on the people around them maintaining the illusion. And when you remove yourself from that equation, you reveal the lie at the core of their existence. You expose the reality that without a captive audience, their grandiosity collapses under its own weight. And what's important to recognize is that your absence does not simply inconvenience a narcissist. It destabilizes the fragile psychological structure that sustains them. And this is why they often react with such intensity when you refuse to engage. It isn't merely a bruised ego, it's an existential threat. By walking away, you force them to face what they fear most, the possibility that beneath the mask there is nothing of real substance. And perhaps the most liberating realization is this: their emptiness is not yours to fix. You are not responsible for filling a void that they refuse to confront. Your role is not to serve as a mirror for someone who cannot bear to see themselves. Walking away is an act of reclaiming your own wholeness, a declaration that you will no longer participate in the illusion. And in doing so, you not only free yourself, but you also deliver the one truth a narcissist cannot tolerate. Without you, their power disintegrates. One of the most effective ways to dismantle a narcissist's power is to remove yourself from the psychological game they play, a game that relies on one key element: your emotional entanglement. Narcissists are masters of creating confusion and self-doubt, weaving a narrative in which your reality becomes distorted and their version of events takes precedence. This process is not accidental. It is deliberate and systematic. When you walk away, you break the spell of this psychological manipulation. You stop participating in the reality they have constructed, and in doing so, you reclaim your ability to trust your own perceptions. At the core of narcissistic manipulation is a tactic known as gaslighting, a term derived from a 1938 play where a man manipulates his wife into questioning her sanity by subtly altering her environment and denying the changes. In a similar way, a narcissist works to undermine your confidence in your own thoughts, feelings, and experiences. It happens gradually. They question your memory of events. They dismiss your feelings as irrational or overblown. And when you react understandably to their provocations, they frame your response as evidence of your instability. Over time, this erosion of your reality leads to a profound sense of disorientation. You begin to doubt your instincts. You question your worth. And most dangerously, you start to rely on the narcissist to interpret reality for you. This is not merely psychological manipulation. It is a theft of your autonomy. By controlling your perception, the narcissist keeps you in a state of emotional dependence. You become so preoccupied with proving your reality or seeking their validation that you lose touch with your own inner compass. And once that happens, they can shape the narrative to suit their desires. If they want to be the victim, they cast you as the aggressor. If they want to be the hero, they paint you as weak or incapable. It is a form of psychological warfare designed to keep you off balance and under their control. Walking away breaks this cycle. It interrupts the manipulative feedback loop. When you distance yourself physically, emotionally, and mentally, you create the space to reconnect with your own reality. And that is where their power begins to crumble. Because the narcissist's influence does not come from any inherent strength. It comes from your willingness to question your reality in favor of theirs. When you remove yourself from their narrative, you remove their ability to define your world. The moment you stop seeking their validation is the moment they lose their grip on you. Narcissists thrive on the idea that they hold the keys to your sense of self. They want you to believe that without their approval, you have no value. But that is a lie. Your worth is not contingent on their recognition. And when you walk away, you send a powerful message, not only to them, but to yourself, that you are capable of defining your reality without their influence. But this process requires a conscious effort. Even after leaving, the effects of their manipulation can linger. You may find yourself replaying conversations, wondering if you overreacted, questioning whether they were right about you after all. This is the residue of gaslighting. the mental and emotional confusion that comes from prolonged exposure to distorted reality. It takes time to untangle yourself from these patterns, but every step you take toward reclaiming your perspective weakens the hold they once had over you. A crucial part of this recovery is learning to trust yourself again. When you've been in a relationship with a narcissist, your intuition is often the first casualty. You've been conditioned to ignore red flags, to rationalize hurtful behavior, to second-guess your gut instincts. Rebuilding that trust means allowing yourself to believe what you see and feel without the need for external validation. It means recognizing that your experiences are real and that your emotions are valid, whether or not the narcissist acknowledges them. This is why no contact is such a powerful strategy. It is not merely about physical distance. It is about reclaiming the mental and emotional space that the narcissist once occupied. Each interaction, each message, each attempt to clear the air is an opportunity for them to reassert their narrative. And when you maintain strict boundaries, you deny them access to your mind. And without that access, their ability to manipulate you dissolves. The beauty of walking away is that it shifts the power dynamic. As long as you remain engaged, whether through anger, fear, or a desire to be understood, you are still playing their game. But when you disengage fully, you take the game away altogether. Narcissists cannot manipulate what they cannot touch, and they cannot control a mind that no longer seeks their approval. The truth is, you never needed their validation to define your reality. That power was always yours. Walking away is not just an escape from manipulation, it is an act of profound self-liberation. It is a declaration that you are the author of your own story. And once you recognize that truth, no one, no matter how skilled in manipulation, can take it from you again.